Welcome to the course that is listening to the land of the Bible. We are here in order to examine the land and see what the land can tell us when we read the land alongside of reading the Bible. So we could talk about why is it that it's so important to be able to do that? And I would say because the geography of the Bible, if we listen to the geography of the Bible, it will tell us little secrets. Now, we are accustomed to reading the Bible on its own for the stories, for the theology, and we don't pay so much attention to the context. So in this course, we are going to be looking at the context, the physical context, to see what kind of secrets the land can tell us and how it can illuminate the text in a better way. So we're going to start by looking at the geography of the Bible. So Bible and geography, and people often ask me, where exactly is geography when it comes to the Bible? And I would say, when you read this book, there is geography on every single page. You may not be accustomed to looking for it. So geography is something that is often in the background, and we just skip over it and we don't notice it because we're looking for theology. So I'm going to help you learn to see the geography that is in the biblical text. Now, why is it so important? And I often tell all of my students that when we read the Bible, we need to be asking not only what happened, but where did it happen? Now, we may not be doing this normally when we're reading the Bible, but we do intuitively know that geography is important. So I'd like to give you an example. Look at the picture that is on the screen. And if we were to think big pictures, so we're going to make massive generalizations here. We're not looking for details. We're not looking for the examples that break the rule. We're not doing any of that. Look at the picture. And just by looking at the geography, I bet that each one of us could come up with assumptions related to the people who are in that picture. So people who live with this kind of landscape, give me your best idea. What do you think they're wearing? What kind of activities are they often involved in? What kind of food is on the menu of local restaurants? How do they interact with other people around them? Do you think there's a lot of tourists who come to visit this place? Is it easily accessible or is it difficult? Now, I like to play this game all the time with different audiences that I teach, and people always come up with the same idea. And I would guess that if you're thinking about this in your own head, that you're probably coming up with similar answers. People who live in this kind of landscape are going to be kind of laid back and casual. Beach landscapes tend to make people kind of slow down a little bit. People often say that there would be a lot of people fishing out in the ocean, of course, maybe even surfing. Lots of people walking around in bathing suits. Seafood is probably on the local menu. That would be a really logical guess. And look at that beautiful geography. It's just inviting people in. And because it is so flat and there aren't that many geographical obstacles, the guess is there's probably an international airport somewhere nearby, so it is easy for tourists to come to visit. Now, take that landscape and compare it to the next picture. Okay, so now we have all of these mountains. We have very deep, like sharp crevices going down into a deep valley. The clouds that are just hanging on to the cliff faces of the mountains. And let's play the same game. What are people wearing? What are they eating at restaurants? How many restaurants do you think there are? Is it easy for tourists to come to visit? Now, just by looking at the landscape, without even knowing where in the world these two places are, my guess is, and I would assume, that you're probably in your head thinking the people who live in that landscape are a very different type of person. So the clothing you wear has to be a lot more robust because the landscape is robust. This is where you get all the North Face gear, the Patagonia gear. You need very rugged materials, things that can handle the elements from the weather. Now, what kind of activities are they involved in? Well, maybe hiking, potentially downhill snow skiing, snowshoeing, maybe even hunting, which leads us to what kind of food are they eating? It's probably a lot gamier, a little bit more robust, and a little heavier. Is it easy for tourists to get there? Well, look at the shape of those mountains. Look how you're just nestled in all of these folds and bends of the mountain. My guess is that is a very difficult place to get to. So it's a little bit more remote. So there's not going to be as much of a tourist season, maybe not even as much connection to the outside world. And maybe that is exactly what you're after. It's a little bit of solitude. So when we look at these, we have this flat beach area, warm, inviting, kind of chill. And we have this mountainous landscape that is going to be a little bit more rugged and a little bit more robust. So we know intuitively, right, that when people live in landscapes like this, the landscape is going to change how people act, what kind of careers they can have, and how they interact with the outside world. Well, this is exactly the same for people in the Bible. In fact, although these are not accurate biblical context pictures, but they communicate the same kind of thing. So there are beach communities where access is very easy, and there's lots and lots of tourists, tons of interactions with the international world. And we have mountains that make people a little bit more confined. So up in the mountainous area, we tend to have not only different types of careers, but we have a different access to the outside world. People who live in the bend and folds of the mountains tend to have a more conservative worldview. Those who live in big, wide, flat, open areas tend to have a little bit more of connection to and awareness of the international world. And so throughout this course, we are going to be asking, where did this happen? So not necessarily all the theological ideas, but we're looking for the geographical ideas. So instead of the biblical stories being theological bubbles that are not connected to one another, we're going to try to understand the land that is anchoring all of these narratives into place. So I don't know about you, but as I was growing up and learning biblical stories, they felt like they were individual bubbles. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is I might have learned of a David and Goliath story, and it was this one little bubble over here, and it had its own theological lesson I was supposed to learn. And then I get maybe a Solomon and his wisdom story, but that was its own bubble over here. And then there's a Jesus story, but Jesus also is kind of in his own theological bubble. And all of these bubbles are floating independently of each other, which is not how we are intended to be reading our Bible. So these people, if we look at these bubbles and we're looking at them only for a theological idea, we forget that they are real people in a real place, dealing with real problems, dealing with a political context and a geographical context that is making life difficult. If we can take all of these little bubbles and we start anchoring them down onto the ground where these things happened, now we start to get this big, full, and robust picture of the events that are happening in the Bible. Another reason it is so important for us to be thinking through the idea of the geography of the Bible is when we read the Bible, we will use mental pictures. In fact, we do this, we can't help but do it because the biblical writers use so many examples. They use so much of their own land images. And so as we're reading, the passages we're reading are full of all kinds of pictures. And so if we're not aware of what the land actually looked like, and if we're not so familiar with the geography, we will insert our own picture. And that has the tendency to change our theology. So let me give you another example. There's a very beloved psalm that many people know, whether they know the Bible really, really well or they're just vaguely familiar with the Bible. Psalm 23 tends to have tons of cultural references around the world. So this is something that people are quite familiar with. Psalm 23 begins, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." Okay, now, if you're reading this, depending on where you live in the world, you might have a picture like the one that is on the screen. So these kind of sheep that are in this type of landscape with that type of green pasture. If you have this picture in your head, then when you're reading Psalm 23, which is really all about this relationship between who God is as a shepherd and who you are as his sheep, what is that relationship between them? So what is the role of the shepherd? What are you expecting from the shepherd? What is your role as a sheep in this psalm? If you have this picture in mind, which is what I tend to see most of the time when people refer to this psalm, or you see it on little Hallmark cards. They tend to have really nice bucolic scenes like this. But if you read this psalm with this picture in mind, how is it influencing your theology? Where is the shepherd in that picture? How necessary is the shepherd in that picture? In fact, if you think, oh, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, now it becomes all about you as the sheep. And he makes me lie down in green pastures, and we think, oh, this is wonderful. I'm gonna lie down. Look, I have all the food that I need. Nothing is going to kill me here. So what role does the shepherd actually play? Now, how about if I show you where this psalm, the images from this psalm, where they come from? So often we say David is the author of Psalm 23. So where would David have been as he was shepherding his sheep as he was growing up?